I fell into a rabbit hole recently. I started looking at how the appearances of Oddworld characters change throughout the different games, and even within the same game. So I thought, why not share what I've found? And I guess the most natural way for me to do that would be to make a video about it. In this video, I'll go through most of the Oddworld games to compare the looks of Mudokons, Sligs and Glukkons. Basically, I'm going to be nitpicking the differences between in-game sprites, cutscene models, promotional renders and concept art, focusing on all the small inconsistencies, whether intentional or not. Please note that I'll be focusing on Abe's Oddysee and Exoddus, and I won't cover characters introduced in other games. When you start up Abe's Oddysee, the first character you see is Abe.
Hello.
Here, his skin color blends between green and purple and varies across his whole body. Depending on the lighting, his eyes are yellow or orange, and his ponytail is striped with orange and purple. This look remains consistent throughout all of the pre-rendered cutscenes you see in the game, and all of the renders seen in things such as manuals and advertisements. Sometimes the 3D renders have details manually painted on top of them. A good example of this is the game's cover, where Abe looks a bit more cartoony. Interestingly, an earlier version of this image was used for this Christmas art. Comparing the two, you can see how the facial expression was achieved by painting on top of the render. Aside from the minor paint-over details, Abe looks the same across cutscenes and promotional material. During gameplay, however, Abe has a much simpler blue and tan color scheme, with white eyes and some sort of dark color for his ponytail. On some sprites he also has wraps or bindings on his arms and feet. All of these things more or less match the original concept art. I suspect that he also has his hairline from the concept art as well. The model used in the ApeSpeak app that was released back in 2012 still has the hairline, but it's hidden behind Abe's head. After extracting the model, we can see that the hairline is still there. As far as I can tell, the bindings and hairline only appear in the sprites for this animation where Abe gets knocked out of the screen. But Abe still appears blue in all of his sprites.
That blue bastard!
So Abe is distinguishable from the other Mudokons in the game. And they're green, right? Not always. In the game's intro we can see Mudokon workers pulling levers, and they have the same colors as the cutscene version of Abe. I'm going off on a tangent here, but in the demo version of this cutscene, the Mudokons seem to have some very uncomfortable posture. This was changed for the release version of the cutscene. But going further into this tangent, during the Pyramid and Scrap Vision cutscenes, it seems that they accidentally used the demo version of these intro shots. Alright, so all the other Mudokons look like Abe in the cutscenes, but they're green during gameplay. Not quite. During the bad ending, we can also see native Mudokons, and they look pretty different compared to Abe. Their skin is much more pale, and they have this blue coloration on their chin. Their eyes don't seem to be as orange as Abe's either, but it's kind of hard to tell from the lighting. I'm guessing that these are supposed to be the same ones we see in the mosaic lines during the game, even though they use the same color palette as the workers. The slingshot Mudokons are blue like Abe though, but I guess they're supposed to be a reflection of himself? I don't know, moving on. Big Face has a big face, but that's not his only distinction from Abe. He also has a brightly colored loincloth, and a slightly darker ponytail, which kind of reminds me of the concept art again. Hold up. In the very first shot he also has those arm and foot bindings, but then he immediately loses them and we never see them again. So that covers Abe's Oddysee, at least the first version. Because for the Japanese version, the Mudokons were changed to have 3 fingers on each hand instead of 4. The reason for this has been covered many times before, so I'm not going to cover it here. But if you're interested, just look it up. What I will cover is that the change only affected cutscenes and backgrounds. Since the gameplay sprites were too low res to notice, they only changed Abe's chant animation. Presumably because re-rendering every cutscene would be too expensive, they instead chose to re-render specific segments where the hands are especially noticeable. You can clearly see the change happening during the good ending, because they accidentally changed Big Face's loincloth color. So you can tell when they reused the original frames and when they re-rendered it with 3 fingers. Having to rework everything to use 3 fingers must have been a big hassle, since in the next game they decided to have 3 fingers in all versions from the start. But was it from the start? No. Actually, for the intro of Abe's Exoddus, they reused clips from the ending of Oddysee. So Abe's Exoddus begins in the original universe where every Mudokon has 4 fingers on each hand, but then when Abe farts, it transports him to a parallel universe where every Mudokon has 3 fingers on each hand, and Big Face's loincloth is no longer unique. But that's just speculation on my part, so moving on. During the intro, we also see the native Mudokon color scheme appear again, but after they leave Monsaic, all of the regular Mudokons appear as green, with purple ponytails and fairly white eyes. But the native color scheme actually comes back in the form of blind Mudokons, because except for their stitched up eyes and their pale ponytails, they seem to look the same. Blind Mudokons, however, have a very unique grey color scheme on their gameplay sprites. Now, going back to Abe. During Oddysee, he received the Scrabanian and Paramonian hand scars, and in Exoddus he gets a chest scar. Weirdly, Abe never actually has the hand scars in any of the new cutscenes. And the only time you see him with the chest scar after he gets it is in the bad ending. After the release of Oddysee, the hand scars were visible on some of the promotional renders, and the same goes for the chest scar after Exoddus. Don't know what's going on with this one though. He doesn't have his hand scars, but he does have his chest scar, which he got after the hand scars, so yeah. Anyway, Abe's scars were never visible on his in-game sprites, since they were shared across all of the Mudokons. And one final note on Abe before moving to the next game: while he doesn't actually wear it in any of the games, an Oddworld inhabitant's necklace was added to most of the promotional art for Oddysee and Exoddus, and this was apparently their way of sneaking in the word Oddworld. But Oddworld changed. Almost 20 years ago, when I first saw clips of Munch's Oddysee, I could tell that something was off. Something felt different about the Mudokons. And the most obvious difference was teeth. It felt wrong, because Mudokons never had teeth up until that point. In Exoddus, we can see a Mudokon skull on the Soulstorm mining company's logo, and it has no teeth. Concept drawings for Mudokon skeletons don't feature teeth either. Mudokons in cutscenes also talk with an almost Muppet-like mouth. But in Munch's Oddysee, they have teeth. Very noticeable, bright teeth. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's talk about Abe again. In Munch, he now consistently has his hand and chest scars, although the hand scars were redesigned between Oddysee and Munch. And he's no longer a blue bastard, because from Munch onward, his look is consistent between the cutscenes and the game. Well, as consistent as they could get in real time on the original Xbox. It seems that when they transitioned to using Maya instead of alias PowerAnimator, their facial rigs were changed significantly. And in my opinion, a lot of their charm was lost. Some of the promotional renders seem to have kept it, while some pushed Abe towards being more cool, and others just look a bit strange. But mostly it seems to be the faces in cutscenes that look off. Now, because I'm focusing on the first 2 games, I'm not gonna cover the different Mudokon types, but I'll just mention briefly that the Mudokons in Munch now have hairpins and are usually green. But in cutscenes with the Raisin, you can see some meditating Mudokons with pale skin. Also, Mudokon hands still have 3 fingers, but for some reason they look more symmetrical than in Exoddus. Well, at this point I could go into how things were changed for the HD version of Munch, but I'd rather just forget about this. Let's move on. After Munch's Oddysee came Stranger's Wrath, but it doesn't feature Mudokons, Sligs or Glukkons, so let's skip a whole decade forward. When Oddworld inhabitants finally came back out of their game-making hiatus and released New and Tasty, the remake of Abe's Oddysee, they decided that Abe should be allowed to have 8 fingers total again. This tasty new Abe model has most of the same proportions as the original cutscene Abe from '97, but modeled using polygons instead of NURBS. This also allowed them to use the same model but with half the triangles during gameplay. Let's compare it to some of the old promotional renders. Bear in mind that this is the lower poly gameplay model, which most likely has less bones compared to the ones used in cutscenes. I've tried to pose the face as close as possible using the original bones, but it would probably be more accurate if I had access to the cutscene version. Here you can see that his stitches and pupils are bigger compared to the original. This was probably done to make them more clear during gameplay. Now for this comparison, we'll ignore the colors and just focus on the values. If we increase the contrast, we can see that the shapes which make up Abe's face are very different. Normally his forehead is just as bright as his mouth. The wrinkly dark area between his eyes used to be a small separator between his mouth and forehead, but on the new model it covers most of his face. So the new model looks different, but I'm sure most people would not be able to pinpoint why it looks different. Abe's facial expressions in New and Tasty are a lot more cartoony and exaggerated compared to the strangely stiff expressions seen in Munch. But they still don't have the same charm as the old ones. I think the New and Tasty Abe model is pretty good, but unfortunately it just looks too different from the original, which is not the case for the Slig and Glukkon models, but we'll get to them later. In the original game, you could go through Scribania and Paramonia in any order, but the cutscenes were made with a specific order in mind. So if you started with Scribania, Abe would already have his Paramite scar in the first cutscene. In New and Tasty, they accounted for this, so there are two versions of each scar cutscene, depending on the order you choose. Abe's gameplay model also changes throughout the game to reflect the hand scar progress. In New and Tasty, all of the other Mudokons are consistently green, and none of the worker Mudokons have ponytails, which makes Abe a lot more special. The native Mudokons have body paint in the form of stripes on their arms, legs and face, and their eyes have a pink hue. Also, Mudokons still have teeth, but they're more subtle and imperfect. Big Face's skin color is no longer the same as Abe's. Instead of green and purple, it's red and blue. Like the other natives, he has body paint as well, but a bit more of it since he's special. The generic native Mudokons from the bad ending were replaced with 3 masked native Mudokons. These masks represent Monsaic, Paramonia and Scribania, and are worn by the natives in each area. The Scribania and Paramonia masks are based on early concept art for Big Face, and the Scribania mask can also be seen on the Scrap Temple itself. Welcome to the far-off future year of 2021. Oddworld Soulstorm is out, and Abe has been redesigned. Unlike New and Tasty, which tried to be faithful to the original and fell a bit short, Soulstorm's design is different enough to get out of that uncanny valley. To me, it doesn't feel like a representation of the old Abe that's a bit off, but a new character who just happens to have the same name and live in a similar world. The new design is much more bulky, and interestingly, Abe is back to having 2 different color schemes for gameplay and cutscenes. While the cutscene version has a very muted color palette, the in-game colors are a mix between the old cutscene Abe and the original concept art. Basically, the green color is all but removed and the darker purple has been limited to his knees and back, leaving the rest of the body with light blue or tan. His eyes are much more pronounced and his ponytail is now made of feathers, and he wears a backpack. I think it's an interesting modern take on the character, but I still prefer the original design. In Soulstorm, all of the Mudokons no longer share the same face. Now only unnamed background characters do. Remember this guy? I wouldn't blame you if you don't, because he looks exactly like this guy, and this guy, and these guys. But in Soulstorm, he looks like this. And there's a guy who looks like this. And there's someone who looks like this. Neat. Mudokons still have teeth. I mentioned before that in Exoddus we see Mudokon skeletons without teeth. Well, in Soulstorm we get to see what Mudokon skeletons look like with teeth. I have no idea if this is supposed to be Big Face or a new character, but I guess it doesn't matter since they're killed off 3.5 minutes after being introduced. And that's all I have to say about the appearance of Mudokons throughout the Oddworld games. So now it's time to talk about my favorite Oddworld species. Sligs look pretty cool. They've got tentacle mouths, mechanical legs, or pants, and they've got these sleek masks which are a frequent topic of discussion. In Abe's Oddysee, all Sligs had these visor masks. It seems the original concept art did not have a visor, but that they changed the mask later on. Their pants also had a bronze alien-looking design, and they carried a Magog cartel flag. Their weapon has also changed from some sci-fi looking thing to one with a drum mag, and then finally to a very simple pump-action shotgun, which functions like an assault rifle. Anyway, Oddysee is very consistent in its depiction of Sligs, except for one thing. The manuals and promotional material depict them with tubes that go from the mask to the pants, just like in the concept art, but the tubes are never actually seen in the game or its cutscenes. If we look at this promotional render and compare it to the original cutscene frame, we can see that they just painted a tube on top of it. In Exoddus, tubes are still not featured in the game, but the original mask design from the concept art is introduced. A lot of people call it the pilot mask, but it is actually different to the ones worn by flying Sligs. As a shorthand, I'll call them visor, lens, and pilot. Even Oddworld Inhabitants has confused the two. As you can see in the Magog on the March broadcasts, while the newscaster wears a lens mask, it appears that they just took this render of a flying Slig and photoshopped in the microphone. Anyway, this mask design only appears during cutscenes and in the GameSpeak menu. All of the in-game sprites, even the crawling Slig ones, still use the visor mask. Amusingly, the manual also uses an old visor mask render right next to this screenshot showing the new mask. The flying Sligs are mostly consistent though, except for this one at the very beginning who has flapping wings instead of a propeller. This can also be seen in early concept art. Otherwise, they appear the same across cutscenes and gameplay. The promo renders for Exoddus used a slightly tweaked mask design which carried over into Munch, and of course during gameplay they look like this. At least they have the tubes now, both in-game and during cutscenes, except when they wear different clothes. We also see one of them blink during this cutscene, which indicates that the red glow actually comes from their eyes, just like on Glukkons, and not the mask itself. The visors and flying Sligs are completely absent in Munch. Instead we get these. But that's not the focus of this video. New and tasty Sligs. Just like in Munch, the mask tubes are now visible everywhere, both in cutscenes and in gameplay. New and Tasty also reintroduces the visor. It's featured in all of the remade cutscenes and assigned to random Sligs throughout the game, along with the lens design. But the lens mask only appears in a single cutscene. Interestingly, they look more like the Munch design than the Exoddus one. I feel like the shaders and lighting in the cutscenes does a disservice to the model. With proper lighting, it looks great. Just like New and Tasty, Soulstorm also has the tubes, in addition to a big variety of mask designs. But the visors are sadly gone. The flying Sligs are pretty similar to their Exoddus counterparts, except they have grenades and other tweaks. Flying Sligs also are the only ones without tubes. Now, instead of just blinking, we can actually see the shape and orientation of the eyes, allowing them to be much more expressive. Which makes me wonder how they would have looked on the visor mask. You know what's bullshit? How often Sligs are depicted as green? I don't get it. Yes, their skin has areas that are slightly green, but overall they're definitely yellow. There's no question about it. Sligs are yellow. So why are the Slig drawings on these vending machines green? I want to see the manager. I guess the manager is probably a Glukkon. Going back to Abe's Oddysee one last time, in the intro we see 6 unnamed Glukkon executives in the boardroom. According to file names in New and Tasty, their suits are grey blue, red, blue, grey blue, green and purple. But when you see them again in the final level, their colors are changed to a very saturated red, a saturated blue, the red again, a dark cyan, green, and the blue again. I assume this happened because of palette limitations, memory budget, or just time constraints. Back to the cutscene. The one in the blue suit actually changes into a red suit for the shot where they all laugh. Another thing to note is that the green suited Gluck who keeps getting close-up shots has a unique spiky collar, which we never see anywhere else. Moloch doesn't even have that collar. He wears the same suit as everyone else, but it might be a distinct shade of purple. And he's the only one with a Magog necklace and a cigar. His suit is also pinstriped, but it's pretty hard to see at this resolution. In New and Tasty, the stripes on his suit are much more noticeable, And now we can clearly see that the other Glukks don't have any stripes. The Glukks all kept their looks from Oddysee, except the suits are shinier and have more distinguishable colors. In particular, the leftmost Gluck got a new brown suit to distinguish it from the other grey-blue suit. The suit colors during gameplay are also consistent with the cutscene. Sadly, the one in the green suit lost his special spiky collar, but I'm sure he's glad that he kept his screen time. Overall, I think the Glukkon models are a great recreation of the originals using more modern textures. And as I said previously, the lighting really makes a difference. Okay, we've finally reached the topic that led to me making this video. The three main antagonists in Abe's Exoddus look different during gameplay compared to cutscenes. Let's talk about the high-ranking executives,
General Drippik, Vice President Slig, and Director Slig.
Let's start with Drippik. A recurring theme for these Glukks is that their promotional render features some type of cigar. In Drippik's case, he smokes a cigar from a pipe, however it's only seen in one cutscene and never in gameplay. His concept art features many different medals of varying shapes and sizes, but it was simplified a bit for the 3D model. The big medal on the left uses the classic cartoon Glukkon head but flipped. 3 of his medals seem to be based on this shooting Slig sprite. This medal is based on a caricature of Farsad, the concept artist behind Drippik. This one has the Magog logo, and this one seems to be a Glukkon head as well, but I haven't been able to match it with any existing art. An unfortunate limitation of the old games is that all characters use the same sprites for facing left and right, except one side is flipped. This means that if they used Drippik's model from the cutscenes to render his game sprites, his eye patch would keep switching sides every time he turned around. In order to keep that from happening, they opted to make his model symmetrical. They also simplified the arrangement of medals, which makes the design easier to read from a low-resolution sprite. His suit also has more of a grey color than the black we see in cutscenes and promo renders. Next up is Slig, who is also missing his cigarette holder in cutscenes and the game. The Magog pin is shown in promo renders, concept art and gameplay, but not in cutscenes. Another peculiar change is that his gameplay sprite has green eyes, instead of his usual red eyes. Like Drippik, his gameplay sprite is symmetrical, so they removed his monocle and suit pocket. Another inconsistency I found is that the image used in all of these Uncle Slig screens is flipped. And finally, the head boner of the Boneworks, Director Slig. Like before, his cigar is gone in cutscenes and gameplay, and like Slig, his eyes have also changed color. Green eyes in game, orange eyes everywhere else. This image also seems to be flipped. But there are still more Glukkons in Exoddus. The Brewmaster has a Mickey Mouse clock in his concept art. For copyright reasons, this was obviously not included in his final model, but it makes for interesting trivia. In addition to the high-ranking Glukks, there's also an endless amount of junior executives. They can only be seen in one of the cutscenes, wearing 3 different suits and shirts. Brown and red, green and light green, and purple and blue. But the gameplay sprites all have a green suit and red shirt. Their eyes are also somewhere between yellow and orange in the cutscenes, while they're red during gameplay. Well, this video is getting pretty long, and I don't have much more to say, so I'll keep it short. Glukkons in Munch look fine in cutscenes, the faces do not look weird like Mudokons, and Glukkons in the game look a bit weird because of technical limitations. Alright, Soulstorm. Glukkons in Soulstorm were redesigned. They have very pale skin, and their faces have a lot more differences compared to each other. Some of them look a bit like generic human-like aliens, but I guess they're fine. Overall, the animation in Soulstorm cutscenes is great. And that's it. I'm finally done with this video. But while making it, I also discovered some other useless bits of trivia. Here you go. In New and Tasty, while all the other cutscenes have remade audio,
this is Rupture Farms. This is Rupture Farms.
the bad ending reuses the original audio.
He wasn't any good. He wasn't really that good. He shot us. He wasn't any good. He shot us.
Also, in the good ending of Oddysee, Moloch loses his clothes and the Slig loses his pants, but in New and Tasty, the Slig keeps the pants on. In one of the newspaper cutscenes from Munch's Oddysee, they feature a strange Photoshop version of the Drippik, Slig and Flag render. Someone actually asked about this image because they thought it meant they were still alive. So in the Dear Elf post of March 2012, he answered that it's probably just an old stock photo they didn't have to pay any royalties for. Which I guess retcons it into actually being a picture of them? For some reason there's 2 versions of this image. This is a thing that exists. It's official, exclusive orange skin for Abe. Moving on. The ending shot from Exoddus, where Abe lifts his hand up towards the moon, originally started by zooming out from the reflected moon in his eye. But that was cut. Now how would I know that, and where would I have gotten this footage from? The answer is the music video for Get Freaky by Music Instructor, which features a bunch of cutscenes from Exoddus with the band inserted into them. There's also this sequence where Abe and the band run across a flipped version of this screen from the game, but the scale is not the same. And that's it, I'm done. I don't usually make videos like this, but thanks for watching.